Hey, so you know how today we're going to talk about endocrine disrupting chemicals. And a lot of the stuff we talk about in environmental science is more something that's going to affect the whole planet. And your role is to try to be a good curator of the planet and try to do what you can to help avoid some of these problems. But this one is about you directly. This is something that you should know about to protect yourself and your health, as well as the environment as a whole. So let's learn about endocrine disruptors. Okay, so let's just start off. So this is about hormones. So hopefully you remember this from biology, but if you don't, basically hormones are chemicals that carry signals both within a cell and between cells, and in some cases even between organisms. Okay, and but basically it's an organic compound that acts like a key fitting into a lock, as is often the case with biological sciences. So essentially, when a hormone binds with a receptor in a cell. So here's a hormone. It's basically a compound floating through, say, the blood system of an animal. It binds to a surface protein on a cell, and this in turn triggers a series of chemical changes within the cell. It could tell the cell to grow, it could tell the cell to die, it could tell the cell to do all kinds of things. So basically, it's how cells communicate with each other in an organism. And when it works right, it works right. But when it gets disrupted, problems ensue, and sometimes quite terrible ones. So basically, what is it that hormones do for an organism? Well, okay, so for instance, growth and development. Okay, like we start off as little babies and we grow and we grow and grow. But at some point, we stop growing as long as there's not a problem with our endocrine system. If you've seen Andre the Giant, he's in a really famous movie called The Princess Bride. His body just never turned it off. He just kept growing and growing and growing, and he eventually died of this endocrine disorder. Uh, Metabolism, when people have diabetes, basically what it means is that they're not producing a particular hormone known as insulin. Insulin basically triggers cells to, it tells cells to process sugars and to convert sugars. Sexual functions and sexual development. So, when we're born, as humans and most mammals and most organisms, in fact, we're not big enough, we're not strong enough, we're not able to care for ourselves, so we certainly can't reproduce, right? And so when we reach a point in our development where we are capable of caring for young, at that point it makes sense for us to become reproductive. So that's puberty. And so what happens is you basically hormones come out through your body. These chemicals go down. They reach your ovaries or testicles, and they basically trigger this total transformation of our bodies. Right. In fact, they even trigger. They tell us that we should be. They trigger the desire for sexual reproduction. They can affect mood, cognitive development. Basically. Homeostasis, like what our body temperature is, what our blood pressure is, whether we're hungry, whether we're thirsty. They control everything. Okay, so clearly they're pretty important things, right? Now, they're produced in animals by glands, which are small organs that they're just designed to produce a specific hormone or class of hormones. So, in our brain we have a hypothalamus, we have a pineal gland, and a pituitary gland. We have thyroids, parathyroids, adrenal glands. Our pancreas, is what makes insulin. Our ovaries and testicles. So all of these are basically glandular organs whose job it is to produce hormones to communicate with other cells in the body to trigger these changes in our bodies. But an endocrine disrupting chemical, or what we'll just call for short EDC, EDCs. Basically, these are chemicals that get into the environment. Sometimes they're natural, more often than not, they're man-made. But the problem is that they alter the ability of hormones to do their job in our bodies. And they basically work in two different ways. So one category of them is basically a hormone mimic. So basically, remember, we have these surface proteins that have they act like a lock, and the hormone acts like a key. And when the key fits in the lock, it triggers this cascade of cellular changes. Well, some of these chemicals fit into those locks. Other ones block them. Okay, they basically they prevent those locks from ever getting keys put into them. So it prevents the cell from ever doing what the hormone is designed to make it do. So here's an example. So in a normal situation, what we have is basically we have this protein that is a hormone receptor. The hormone is a protein floating in the blood system of an organism. When it comes into contact with this, it triggers a cellular response, and the cell does what it's designed to do. and the organism is healthy and normal in its function. A hormone mimic would be one that it basically has a similar shaped protein. So it also is like a key that fits the same lock. And so when it's present, it triggers that cellular response that should be in response to a signal sent by our glandular organs. But in this case, my body's not sending out a signal for this to happen, but this chemical is causing my cells to do what my body should be telling it to do when my body's not telling it to do it. Or you can have a hormone blocker, right? So basically what it does is my body is sending out a signal for the cellular process to occur, and these chemicals are basically keeping it from happening, so my cells can't receive the signal. In either case, it can be quite catastrophic to the organism. And now some of them in particular, some hormones are ones that actually play a role in gene expression. So they can play a role in what's called epigenetics. I don't know if you remember that from biology, but basically, in DNA, there's these things called histones that wind up the DNA and keep some of it from unzipping, so only certain genes can be expressed. And so it changes that methylation process by which these histones wind up the DNA. And so, it prevents some genes from being expressed, or it lets too much DNA get expressed. So basically, it changes the mRNA that's coming out and going to the ribosome. So we're making proteins, we're not making proteins we're supposed to make, or we're making ones we shouldn't be making, or it could even cause changes in the actual replication of the DNA itself. And so these type of changes can lead to cancer, and that's one of the things that we often worry about for our own personal exposures. So let's just go through the litany of horrible things that these things can do to us. Okay, so cognitive development. So brains have to develop. We're born with unformed brains, and those brains have basically hormones telling them how to grow. And if you disrupt that, man, you just never develop a properly functioning brain. Sexual development, as I said, so like our body tells us, now is the time for you to become sexually mature. Well, if you get that, if you have a hormone mimic, you become sexually mature too early. Which, by the way, I don't know if you've heard about this, but there's this very well documented phenomenon that in the last, say, 50 years, girls have begun starting puberty at younger and younger and younger ages, and no one's really sure why. And one thought is maybe it is these EDCs. And what I should point out is with EDCs, I'm going to go through the list of known ones, but we know of like at least 1,000 of them. There's probably more of them, and it's really difficult to research their effect because it has to do with the whole organism, right? So it's not really something you can really do very well in a petri dish, and because you really can't isolate people from these things, we really can't get enough control variables to say this one does this. In some cases, it's pretty evident, but in a lot of cases, we don't know. So why girls are going through puberty so much earlier, it could very well be because of exposure to some kind of EDC that we're either unaware of, or we're unaware that it does this thing. Maybe it's not. We don't know. But anyway, let's keep going. It can affect fertility, sperm production, the release of egg cells. It can impair neurologic function. Another one is it basically, our immune response is basically hormones, and it can basically interrupt that. And so in some cases, it can suppress immune response, making organisms more likely to die. And this happened to like seal populations in Norway. Or a lot of people think like there's a lot of documented cases of increasing levels of allergic reactions that people have. More and more people have severe allergies. And there's some thought this could very well be because you have these hormone mimicking EDCs that are causing the immune system to be activated, even though our body's not trying to do that. Also, too, whether or not we generate fat cells is controlled by our hormones. So hormones say, hey, you should be storing more energy or using more of it. And so it can interfere with that, and also it can interfere with our ability to produce insulin. So that's a lot of problems that can be produced by a lot of different chemicals. But the point is, it's like the chemicals in the environment that often cause problems to us. This is the mechanism by which they cause their problems. So I'm sure you're not at all surprised to know that chemicals out there can cause cancer, right? Well, they cause a lot of other things too, and they're all basically doing it through the same mechanism of disrupting our endocrine system. And the worst case scenario is exposure in utero or in early childhood development. And so basically, if a developing fetus, so basically a developing fetus, it's so reliant on its endocrine system working properly to tell which cells to do what in order to develop properly. So if you get exposed early on, it can lead to a whole host of problems. The most tragic, of course, of which is impaired cognitive development. If you basically get exposed to high level, and usually we're talking about this takes pretty high levels, right? So this isn't just background exposure. This is fairly significant exposures. But if you get those significant exposures in utero, you may never get to the point that you are intellectually capable of caring for yourself, and that's one of the most tragic things that can happen to a human being. And nobody knows. Like in the United States, there's a lot of kids diagnosed with what's called attention and deficit hyperactivity disorder (ADHD). Back there, it seems like every other kid I teach has this diagnosis, and there's some thought that it may be related to this. We don't know. Okay, so unfortunately, because we know that our endocrine system controls so much of our bodies, and we know that so many compounds have the ability to either block or mimic these hormones, we don't really know how much of the problems we see in our society, in the human population and wild population, are the result of these. And now let's just talk about wildlife, right? So a lot of times in environmental science, we're talking about not just humans, we're talking about wild populations as well. So what happens when these things get into nature? Well, you can get reproductive difficulties, which lead to population decline. In other words, like low fertility rates. So it can produce, the manufacturing sperm, is controlled by hormones. And if your body's told not to do them, you don't. So we see that's a fairly common thing is a diminishment in sperm production, which leads to a diminishment of population. Another one's kind of weird. This doesn't happen with people, but it happens with a lot of other organisms, especially like, say, fish, reptiles, and amphibians, is changes in the male-female ratio. It's weird to think about, but we all start off in utero as females. Every one of us. Like, guys, why do you have nipples? Well, the reason you have nipples is because you're basically a girl, a female, who got hormones at a certain point that told you to develop into a male and not into a female. Your testicles, guys, they are just ovaries that descended. Okay, so basically, it is a hormonal response that causes females to turn into males. And so what happens is we find in these wildlife populations, especially things like amphibians, fish, and reptiles, like alligators, frogs, fish, we find that there's this inordinately high number of males in the population and not females, because there's basically this hormone mimic that's telling these females to turn into males. Obviously, that's going to significantly affect the population. Without females, there's no reproduction. The thinning of eggshells in birds, like from DDT, like that same thing. So it is a hormone that tells the bird how to make eggshells, and it got disrupted. An abnormal development of skeletons and organs. So you see these awful deformities of these frogs here as a consequence of these endocrine disrupting chemicals. So let's just talk about some sources. All right, so there's a lot of sources because there's a lot of them. Like I said, there's over 1,000 of them known. So basically, one of the main ones is industrial chemicals, solvents, things we use to dissolve things, pesticides, and these things can they can leach in the groundwater. Some of them can be transmitted to us through the air. Some of them bioaccumulate. We can get them to the food we eat. So pesticides are a big one. Plastics are a big one. There's a lot of the exposure we get is because of things that are put in plastics. Cosmetics and skin creams, sunscreens are a big source of exposure, as are lubricants and like nonstick pans. Like some of the earlier nonstick pans had a lot of these. Another one is soy-based products like soy milk, soy protein. That has a naturally occurring ones, but it still has a problem that it can affect human development. All right, and then I should point out that lead and cadmium are also EDCs, so they're heavy metals, but the way they function in part is by disrupting our endocrine systems. So, all right, but let's just talk about the super concerning ones. Okay, the super concerning ones are the ones that biomagnify. And in order to biomagnify, you have to be lipid soluble, dissolve into fats. You have to be very durable, like you can't degrade in the environment. Once you're made, you stay made. Okay, and so there's basically 3 categories of these that are known and are seriously problematic. The ones are dioxins. So in a previous one, I talked about love canal. Dioxins were the problem. So dioxins are basically byproduct of herbicide production, paper manufacture. They're used in the liquids inside of transformers. They can be the result of burning things, burning organic things like plastics and stuff like that, wildfires. Okay, so dioxins are a problem. Another one is polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs. And these ones are ones, like I said, from electrical. I'm sorry, those are ones from electrical transformers, not the dioxins. Okay, hydraulic fluids. So basically, industrial compounds we use for lubrication, heat transfer, and making plastics. And then, of course, there's DDT, which, that was the first biomagnification one. Rachel Carson's book Silent Spring was all about. But there's also, can I say this right? Glyphosates and chlorophenols. I think I said it correctly. And these are basically used in pesticides. A lot of ways pesticides functions by using hormone blockers to disrupt cellular neurologic communication. And then some other ones we just want to talk about. So those are the ones we talked about. Most of these, they're highly controlled. We just, most developed countries do not put these things out there anymore. We try really hard to keep them from being manufactured at all. Okay, but there's other ones that we still use because they're so useful, and they don't biomagnify because they don't stay made when they're in the environment, or they're not fat soluble. So let's just look at some of these. PBA. Okay. PBA is basically used in making certain plastics, certain resins. So, like the plastic bottles that you get plastic. When you go to the store and you buy plastic bottles, a lot of these have BPA in them. In food storage containers. So you'll notice sometimes it'll say no BPA. That's important. You want to look for no BPA. BPA, the concern is it can cause cancer because of its ability to impair our hormones. Phthalates are ones that we put in to make plastics kind of flexible. So like little squeezy rubber toys that babies have. We also put them in girls. I hate to say this, cosmetics have these things in them. We also put them in sunscreens. So that's a source. Triclosan is basically in welcome to COVID, right? We're using this antimicrobial stuff all the time. Actually, to be honest, most of the more effective anti-COVID stuff is just alcohol. Alcohol is not an EDC. But the antibacterial ones, so a lot of the cleaning products that people use in their homes that are antibacterial, they use triclosan, which is definitely something that is known to be an endocrine disruptor. And then the perfluorochemicals, so like nonstick food rubbers, microwave popcorn, the Teflon pans. And then there's naturally occurring ones, okay? Phytoestrogens. So basically, these are plant products that, and the way we mostly encounter them is in soy products, soy milk, soy protein, things like that. Okay, and so you can basically reduce your exposure to these compounds by making choices about which of these chemicals you're willing to expose yourself to. But even then, a lot of they just get they get into the water we drink, they get into the food we eat, and so honestly, we can make choices that we can make our choices. But the truth is, we need governmental help to try to determine which of these chemicals really needs to be eliminated, the way we eliminated DDT and dioxin. Okay, thanks for watching.